My name is Akley Olton, and I am a filmmaker and visual artist from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. St. Vincent is a small country in the English Caribbean. It's one of the lesser Antilles. It used to be a colony of the British Empire. The Queen's Head is still on the money. Small, simple island lifestyle. The main industries are tourism and agriculture. Before the colonization, there were some indigenous people on the island. There were different types of indigenous people, and the most recent dive into the heritage or the history of the island brought us to the Garifuna. All of the syncretic human interactions that developed on the island. The Garifuna represent a mixture of Amerindians from South America who traveled north from the Orinoco Valley, and it also represents a fusion with Africans. Some say from West Africa, some say more specifically Mali. We're not sure about the exact origins of the Africanness. The island was, it was a colony of the British Empire, used to create sugar and cotton. So they had a workforce made of slaves. They imported slaves from Africa. So there, it's really blurry about the origins of the peoples of the island. But right now there's a kind of awakening, a drive to rediscover identity and origins that existed before the Europeans came. The indigenous people, they migrated from the Orinoco Valley in South America. So they came up through Venezuela, up the chain of islands, and settled in St. Vincent.
Wow.
The island was one of the last places to be colonized by the Europeans during the 17th to 18th century, and there was a native population, of these people. They were called Kalinago, descendants of the people who came up from the Orinoco Valley, and they defended the island, viciously. Like, they defended the island. They didn't allow anybody to come in, and then the island was also deemed initially as a bad investment for a colony because it had an active volcano. The volcano is still active today, and it also it's very mountainous. It's very hard to build roads or to create buildings. It's a crude, beautiful, lush island, but it was hard to conquer, and it's still hard to conquer. We're still trying to figure it out. There's a story that explains the Garifuna coming as a result of an encounter between Africans who escaped slavery. There's a story of a slave ship crashing, and sinking off the coast of St. Vincent. The only survivors were slaves, or black people. They made their way to the shore, and the Kalinago people invited them into their communities. And this is it was a union of people. I guess an example of a syncretic community that was born in St. Vincent. There's another story that explains the origins of the Garifuna as a people who were derived from the brother of Mansa Musa, who was one of the greatest black African emperors. He's noted as one of the richest men of all time. And his brother is said to have gone on a voyage to cross the Atlantic Ocean before Christopher Columbus. He made his way maybe to St. Vincent and made contact with the people who were there. And this too, is a potential explanation of how the Garifunas came to be. When the British came to the island and the French, they met them there. So the indigenous people who came up from South America, I guess visually, they kind of look maybe like the Aztecs or the Mayas, in terms of skin and hair texture and things like that. But the Garifuna they had the culture of these people, but they were African. So the British called them the Black Caribs, right? And they used this blackness to discredit these people, the right to their home, to the island, so they could take it away from them. They said, well, if they're black, they must be escaped slaves, which means they have no right to be there. So they use that to justify a genocide, more or less, because these people were defending the island. They were like, for more than 200 years, Europeans were coming to try to take it, and they couldn't take it because they were fighting them off. So what happened in the end, there's a story of one of the last heroes of the Garifuna, greatest hero, a guy called, well, in St. Vincent, he's called Joseph Chatoyer, but I'm sure his name was something else because Chatoyer is French and Joseph is English. So, there's some research that needs to happen still. But Joseph Chatoyer is the only hero of the island, the country of St. Vincent and the Grenadines at the moment. He's the only hero. And there's an annual celebration on the 14th of March. And over the past 10 years, I personally started to see a rise in the consciousness of the Vincentian people. And I also started to see what seems like a sort of, if you want to call it a returning, people from other places coming back to St. Vincent, claiming that this is their homeland, that they were exiled from it. And I guess it sparked interest, it became very interesting for me, and I went into it. Garifuna means the people of cassava, la gente de la yuca. Yes, this is what Garifuna, this is a part of the identity of these people. Like the cassava is very important for them. The story is that the British dropped them off in Roatan, and they were, I guess, displaced, and they were very anxious about finding a way back. So they made their way to mainland Central America. Some of them made communities there in Honduras, in what became Honduras. Some of them went north to Belize, Guatemala, Belize, and some of them went south to Nicaragua. So there are communities along that stretch of beach on the Caribbean coast. There are communities of black people, and some of them speak a indigenous language that has its roots in the Orinoco Valley. They were trying to find their way back to St. Vincent, to Euromit, to their homeland. So that's the idea why they're dispersed. I should mention that there's also a huge population in the United States, between California and New York. In St. Vincent, before the English came, we're not going to pretend that they had a perfect society that was free of violence and disadvantage. And so, like lots of other peoples, there were some groups who, I guess, had fights or wars with other groups, other indigenous groups, and what would happen is whoever won or whoever was victorious in whatever battle would maybe take the women of the other tribe. And I think in St. Vincent it resulted in a kind of strange language mix where the women would speak one language and the men would speak another language. And to this day it still resonates, or it's still evident in the language of the Garifuna communities. A woman has a different word for leaf than a man. That's the idea. And they say that the language is very South American based, like it has similarities with other languages from South America, from the indigenous people. It doesn't have a lot of African roots. There is also some presence of French, English, and Spanish in this language. So I guess the Garifunas, they took a bit of everything that they encountered in this journey. So you have to understand the idea of living on an island. Like for people in a cosmopole, it's relaxed, it's vacation, it's freedom in a sense. But what the landscape of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the island itself, it's like this, because there's lots of mountains and extinct volcanoes, and then there's an active volcano, which is the highest point. So it's like this, lots of peaks and valleys. So you could live in this valley, you could live in a valley here, and you have no idea what's going on in the other valley, because there's a big mountain in between, but it's still a small island. And what manifested was different people or different groups had enough space and enough privacy to live how they felt like. So the Garifuna community is also polygamous. So in some of the books that I've read, it said that the idea was, as long you could have, the men could have as much wives as they wanted to. The only thing is they had to build them a separate house, and I guess they live a really free life. The island is very lush, and the soil is very rich, so there was food everywhere.
But the polygamy was only for men, not for women.
That's a great question.
Then it's freedom for men.
I think so. It seems so. Yeah. Well, I'll have to go into that a little bit more. It is freedom for men, but then the society is still very interesting, because the female had, I guess she had the responsibility of educating the children and passing on the knowledge of the ways of the older people, or the beliefs. So the woman played a very important role in the community, and still does today. A lot of the leaders in the communities in Central America are women, not men. The men would become powerful maybe when there is a need for them to maybe create an army or something. But most of the men were like in the everyday activity. The men would go and find the food, that was the idea, and the women would be the person who organizes the house and organizes the children, and
the traditional way to live.
Yeah.
A little machista.
Very machista. So I read a quote one time that I fell in love with, and it said, "To be Garifuna is to take care of the land and the sea, and to live in harmony with your community and with your system of understanding. Take care of the world, and to make children to continue this way of life." Which I saw it as beautiful, as interesting in its own way. I mean, it's not about assuming wealth. It's not about dominating other people. It's also about taking from the earth and putting things back in. It's not about exploiting. So a lot of the indigenous communities before the Europeans, they were like, some of them weren't farmers. They were hunters, or they were gatherers, which means they would only go and find food when they needed it. They wouldn't. The concept of the refrigerator didn't exist for them, where you have to stock up food for some other time. And then the weather, the climate on the island it's rain and sun. It's pretty much the same. There's no winter. So there wasn't this idea of consumption or using things too much. And they had a spiritual connection with the land and with the sea. Like the I guess there's similarities between lots of different indigenous peoples. So there's this quote that says, "If you don't know your past, you are probably going to be liable to repeat some of the problems, that if you're not able to confront your past, or if you don't know your past, maybe you'll just keep on repeating the same thing over and over again." And in some ways, I see that that's happening to the Garifuna community. The exile and the genocide and the loss of their land and their right to a place to live, that happened 200 years ago, 220 3 or something years ago. In a way, it's happening again right now in places like Honduras, where after the coup in 2009 and a right-wing U.S.-sponsored government took over the country. This was when is his name Emmanuel Zelaya? He was running as the opposition, and they flew him out of the country, dropping him. Right. So the Garifuna right now, they're facing what seems to be a second exile from their lands that they've been living on for 200 years. This is specifically in Honduras, because the government of this country has a business interest in developing the beaches into mega tourism cities and resorts, and to take advantage of the tourism industry. And while it might be good for the economy of the country, it's affecting the lives of this very important group of people. In 2001, the UNESCO named the Garifuna language, music, and culture a testament of the awesome power of the oral heritage of humanity. I don't know if I have it right, but something like that. And they, they were celebrated globally, for what they are and who they became. And right now, they're being exiled. Like people are attacking the communities,
But they were recognized by
recognized by UNESCO in 2001 as a very important example of the intangible heritage of humanity. It's like testament of resilience and survival, and as a people. And that was 2001. It's 2019 right now, and in Honduras, there are people who could tell you stories about police raiding their communities and shooting some of the leaders of their communities. There's kidnappings. There's all sorts of manipulation. At all. It's like they hold nothing back because they want to take the land so that they could make their investments. Hope, they have always been a resilient people. They've always been strong, and they fight to preserve this thing because they know the value of it. I mentioned that there's also a large community in the United States, and I think last year they were actually doing a census to have their numbers because they want to organize. I don't know if it's in a political way, but they want to organize themselves in the US. In St. Vincent, a lot of Vincentians have been exploring their origins, discovering beyond what the English history books, because the English wrote our history, the history that we learn in school, in secondary, primary, and even universities. It's written by English historians. But a number of Vincentians have been going into things and exploring and finding out. And the word Garifuna, I know this word Garifuna, or I found out about it when I was growing up in St. Vincent, because there were others who had the same sentiments about finding out who they are, and they went to Central America, and some Garifuna from Central America also came to St. Vincent. So there is a ongoing dialogue that happens between St. Vincent and the communities in Central America. And in a kind of a way, it's like a homecoming, it's like a return, but it's complex because St. Vincent became a country with another identity, and under the constitution of St. Vincent, the Garifuna don't have legal claim to the island as their nation. What they have legal claim to is Honduras, Belize, Guatemala, because this is where they were born and have lived for 200 years. But in their spirits and in their soul, Yorome means homeland, and it's the name that they have preserved for St. Vincent. So St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for them, it's called Yorome. It's another country. Yeah. in terms of the future, you know, they're constantly trying to find ways to preserve this heritage and to pass it on. I know in Honduras there's a movement right now with some members of different communities to create their own tourism investments so that the community could create wealth. And you know, the government isn't going to take it from them. We're going to build our own hotels and you know, have our own restaurants and you know, keep our communities alive. And there are also others who are doing classes, you know, they teach the language. So I intend to go to Honduras or go to Guatemala and you know, enroll in a class so I could learn this language as well, because I think it would be super important to my reconstruction of personal identity, you know. I call it my personal journey of emancipation. You know, to rid myself of the colonial heritage that I was given at birth. I was born as a child, you know, innocent. I came into the world, and then my mother, my father, my society started to tell me things. Started to tell me that my heritage comes from slavery, from oppression. But for me, these Garifuna represent something else. It represents a heritage of resilience, of freedom, of powerful spiritual connection to the land and to the forest and to the sea. And it's another way of living and another way of defining freedom. It's not capitalistic freedom that we get when we have money. It's a different kind of freedom. And I would like to explore it, you know, because it's difficult for a black man to make his way in this world right now. You know, it's intense wherever you go.
Okay.
I'm making a road trip documentary, and well, it's a road trip docudrama, and it surrounds the journey of a young Vincentian who wants to, I guess, discover his ancestral knowledge or heritage. And he decides to go on a journey from St. Vincent to Honduras, to Guatemala, to Belize, to Nicaragua, to experience a little bit of how his country was before the colonization, and also to learn the language, this language that was spoken 200 years ago that nobody remembers in St. Vincent. So that's the idea in terms of the narrative, but it's really a project that tries to connect St. Vincent, connect black people in the Western world to Africa in a different way. It wants to tell a story of a Caribbean that existed before the colonization, that was thriving, that was rich, that was powerful, that was, you know, that had its own dynamics. And it also wants to connect this idea of a different kind of black man or black woman or black person in the West whose heritage is not necessarily derived from slavery. That's the idea. So it's, like I said to you, it's my personal journey to self-emancipation, and I guess it's a testament of the power of film and art, and I guess the desire to know yourself. And I think the whole idea of it is that it would become a piece of art that would be transformational in St. Vincent, that could foster a more, what do you say, a better relationship between the Garifunas and the Vincentians, you know. Like I would love if some of the practices of the Garifuna could take ground in St. Vincent, you know, like could take roots, could come back to the island. If we could teach the language in the schools, if we could, you know, learn the rituals, you know, like I want to use this project to encourage that.
What is the name of the project?
So the project is called Hairouna, Land of the Blessed, and the word Hairouna is Kalinago. It comes from the the people I mentioned who came up from the Orinoco Valley and settled in the islands that are now called the Lesser Antilles. And well, the word Hairouna means land of the blessed, and it for me it embodies this idea of the richness that existed before, you know, the Europeans decided to exploit the region. So yeah, so that's why I chose the title. It's also one of the ways I was introduced to, you know, this indigenous part of my heritage, because it's a thing you grew up hearing. You know, you grew up hearing about Hairouna. The bear of the island is called Hairoun bear. So it's a thing that's there in the consciousness of the people, and it points to the indigenous past, but it's not the story and the relevance and the significance of the indigenous past is not present in the everyday life of the Vincentian, you know, because we're like transcultured black Englishmen, you know, or women or people. It's like Britain came and transplanted their way of life, their system, their infrastructure, libraries, everything, you know, they transplanted it on the island and created a version of their society for us to follow and emulate, which we're still doing up to this day. I mean, last week yes. Prince Charles, the next heir to the British throne, you know, was in St. Vincent, and he's the head of the state, you know. His mother is the head of the country. It's crazy how I guess I grew up hearing, you know, we're independent and there's an independence celebration every year, and then this guy comes and, you know, the military and the police and the prime minister and everybody just hand over their power to him, and that's how it is, that's how it works. And when I go to London or when I travel to the north or to Europe, it's a different experience for me. Like, I don't have the privilege of an Englishman, so why should I live my life imitating him, you know? Like, why should I do that? Why should I continue to do that? So I want to use this project to express these ideas and, you know, to share a journey of a young black man who's positive and wants to find a way into the future that acknowledges the past, that you know, that takes lots of, you know, I guess, lots of the rich things that were forgotten and replaced by English. You know, like I want to access some of that for me, for my journey, but I also want to share what I find with everybody in my country, everybody in the West, everybody who's black, everybody who could identify with feeling misplaced or, you know, or disconnected from who you truly are. Yeah.
In this field project?
Well, the challenge is, so in St. Vincent, we have the culture that I met when I came to self and came to understanding is the culture of the West. You know, it's capitalistic, exploitive. You know, it's about, you know, making money. It's about resources and dominating, and it doesn't really attribute so much value to things like culture, yes, but culture that has a direct economic return. So, you know, like soca music and carnival and, you know, tourism and these kinds of things are considered culture, but the actual way of life, the relationship between the people and the mountain and the seas, which, you know, because culture means the way of life, that needs to be explored and to be understood better in our society, because our culture at the top right now, our system of value was put in place by the British. So we appreciate, or we think everything from outside of the island, everything from Europe or from the US, from the north is better. So me deciding I wanted to be a cineasta or filmmaker, it hasn't come across so easily to lots of people in my country. Like they don't buy into what I'm doing so easily, because one, they don't see the direct economic benefits of it, and two, I mean, they're intimidated by the idea of cinema. They think it's a big hype, you know, like a thing that, well, one person said it to me. They said, listen, filmmaking and cinema and movies and this thing that you're getting into, it's for rich people. It's not for you. And some, like, 2 days ago I was reminded of it, because I was leaving my country, and you know, I have camera gear and I travel, and well, the immigration didn't believe I was a local. You know, they opened up my bags and they saw my cameras and whatever, and they asked me how long I was here, what am I doing, and you know, because within this society it's hard to accept something, you know, someone who claims to be a cineasta or who has the knowledge to be it, and is also local. You know, we are accustomed to Americans, and you know, so the film touches on a number of themes that are pretty relevant, you know, right now globally. One of them is climate change, and you know, the story is of a young man going from a society that is, you know, pretty much Western. You know, like the tastes and likes of this society is ties into the tastes and likes of the Americans and whatever, and he moves to from I guess a contemporary society to a society that lives more in sync with traditional ways of, you know, using the land and using the sea. So I feel if we are able to access some of this knowledge and share it on a wider platform, maybe we could encourage some people to just maybe confront how you're living, how confront your relationship with the land and with the sea, to I guess take care of the planet, to heal it, to allow it to heal, to not only exploit resources but to take out and to give back, you know. So that's one theme I want to explore, like how can you learn from indigenous communities to create a better future. And the other thing I want to explore is food security. The Garifuna's knowledge of plant diversity and of seeds and alimentation, and you know, it's pretty vast. There's also a medicinal aspect to this knowledge, and I want to access some of it for me personally. I have a story of how I discovered some of the power of the medicinal, you know, knowledge of the Garifuna. I was in Kingstown in St. Vincent in 2012. I was at a bus stop waiting on a bus, and a lady dressed in traditional clothing, she came over, and I don't know why she spoke to me, but she decided to speak to me, and you know, we were just standing there, and she said, do you know what that is? And it was a little plant growing through the pavement, you know. And well, I say, well, some, you know, it's a weed and some plants, you know, just growing through the pavement. And then she called it a name. It was a name in Garifuna, which I don't remember and cannot pronounce. And she said that they used it to make a tea for their babies when the baby has a cold or a fever. And I guess the metaphor, the power of the moment, you know, of this woman who appears out of nowhere to tell me the value of this weed growing in the pavement. It was so powerful, you know, because I grew up, you know, like the more affluent people would cut the grass, you know, cut the natural vegetation and plant a lawn, you know, to have a beautiful aesthetic and a beautiful living area, whatever. But none of them knows the value of these things that they call weeds, because you know, all they have is an English education. So I would like to access some of this medicinal knowledge and also use the platform of film and multimedia to share it to whoever's interested. So that's two themes. The other theme is identity, and the power that can be accessed when you discover who you are and not who you're told to be. So that's the other thing that propels the narrative, and that's the other strong theme is identity.
Okay, Akley. Thanks a lot. Do you want to give a message? Because probably this program will be seen by a lot of people. If you want to say something to the people.
Well, I feel like I've said a lot, but I guess if I should say anything, it would be an encouragement to other people, out there in the world who are around or who hear me or who are interested, that if you feel there is something inside of you that you need to say, or you have to say, or you have to share, you should listen to it and find a way to do it, because maybe it would allow you to access more of yourself than you can at the moment. Maybe it would allow you to connect to more people, to the world. It would teach you something else. It would open up another door or portal or something. And if you have a strong conviction, listen to it and follow through, and try to get to the end, try to complete the mission, because it would be very important for you and for lots of people. Like, I never felt like, my society told me that I had to, make a living and, get a job and do these things. And I am doing it, and I have done it, but I've always felt like I wanted to contribute in a different way. And maybe in the beginning I didn't know how, but the things that I seem to be interested in and that I hold on to, they take me to places that I never expect to go. And I think it's because it's where I need to be. It's the path I need to walk. So I keep trusting in these ideas and these reasons that life has given to me to do these things. So if you're there, believe in yourself and just follow through.